Picture John Wayne's iconic walk down that dusty street. High noon. Two gunfighters face off. The tension builds. Hands hover over holsters. Then the lightning-fast draw that decides everything. Here's the problem. That scene never happened. Hollywood created a Wild West that existed only in their imagination. Every shootout you've seen, every romantic outlaw, every lawless frontier town is all fiction designed to sell movie tickets. The real Wild West was so different from what you think you know, it would shock you. Before we dive in and discover the truth, hit subscribe so you never miss another tale from the Wild West. Let's start with the biggest lie of all, those dramatic high noon duels. You know the scene. Two men square off in the middle of town while everyone watches from behind windows. They stare each other down, hands twitching near their guns, until someone draws first. In the entire documented history of the American frontier, there was exactly one formal duel that resembled Hollywood's version. Wild Bill Hickok versus Davis Tutt in Springfield, Missouri, 1865. Every other gunfight you've heard about was either a drunken brawl, an ambush, or pure accident. Real confrontations were quick, messy, and usually involved multiple people shooting wildly at close range. No dramatic pauses, no honor code, just chaos and panic. Most of the time, nobody got hit because those old revolvers were about as accurate as throwing rocks. But what about all those saloon shootouts? Chairs flying, cowboys diving for cover, bottles exploding behind the bar. More Hollywood nonsense. Saloons were businesses. Business owners wanted paying customers, not corpses cluttering up their establishments. Most saloon fights were fistfights that lasted about 30 seconds before someone broke them up. The elaborate choreographed brawls with men swinging from chandeliers existed only in movies. Here is what really happened in saloons. Bar owners often confiscated weapons at the door. That is right. Many saloons had stricter security than modern nightclubs. They wanted people drinking and gambling, not shooting holes in their ceiling. Most frontier towns banned firearms within city limits completely. Dodge City, the supposedly wildest cattle town in America, posted a giant sign in the center of town that said, "The carrying of firearms strictly prohibited." Deadwood, Tombstone, and Abilene all had similar laws. When visitors arrived in these towns, they had to check their weapons with the sheriff or leave them outside the city limits. The famous gunfight at the OK Corral happened precisely because the Clanton gang violated Tombstone's weapon laws. Wyatt Earp was not some trigger-happy vigilante. He was enforcing existing gun control ordinances. These frontier towns that Hollywood portrays as lawless hellholes actually had more restrictive gun laws than many modern American cities. You could carry a concealed weapon in New York more easily than you could carry one openly in Dodge City. But Hollywood needed drama. John Wayne, Clint Eastwood, and Gary Cooper created images that had absolutely nothing to do with historical reality. They turned rare exceptions into daily occurrences because audiences wanted excitement, not the boring truth about frontier business regulations. The real Wild West was about commerce, not combat. These towns existed to make money from cattle drives, mining, and trade. Violence was bad for business. Dead customers do not spend money. Shootouts scared away investors. Town leaders worked hard to maintain order because chaos meant bankruptcy. When gunfights did occur, and they were rare, they usually happened outside of town. They involved people who knew each other personally, and they were over in seconds. No slow-motion draws, no dramatic speeches, just sudden violence followed by someone bleeding out in the dirt, while bystanders tried to figure out what had just happened. The most dangerous thing in a frontier saloon wasn't an outlaw with a six-shooter. It was drinking water that hadn't been boiled properly. Disease killed more people in the Old West than gunfights ever did. But none of that makes for good cinema. So Hollywood gave us myths instead of history, and those myths became more real to us than the actual past. Now let's talk about those romantic outlaws, the folk heroes who supposedly captured America's heart. Jesse James, Billy the Kid, Butch Cassidy became cinematic icons. Hollywood turned them into charming rebels fighting against an unjust system. Robin Hood with revolvers, stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. Real outlaws were seen as dangerous criminals who threatened community safety. They were not beloved by anyone except maybe their immediate families. Jesse James was not some noble rebel. He was a bank robber and murderer who terrorized innocent people. Billy the Kid was not a misunderstood youth. He was a killer who died at 21 because everyone wanted him dead. When newspapers wrote about these men, they portrayed them as menaces to society, not heroes. The romantic outlaw with a heart of gold narrative came decades later through dime novels and Hollywood films. At the time, communities actively hunted these criminals and celebrated when they were captured or killed. Take Butch Cassidy's Wild Bunch. Hollywood shows them as lovable rogues pulling off clever heists. In reality, they were a gang of violent criminals who robbed trains and banks at gunpoint. The Pinkerton Detective Agency and local law enforcement pursued them relentlessly because they were disrupting commerce and threatening lives. When they finally fled to South America, it was not a romantic adventure. It was desperate criminals running from justice. The truth is that most frontier towns had lower murder rates than modern American cities. Tombstone's worst year on record was 1881, with exactly 3 homicides. 3. Compare that to any major city today, and you'll realize how peaceful these places actually were. But here's another myth that might surprise you. Not everyone rode horses everywhere. In fact, most people couldn't afford a horse. A decent horse cost a month's wages for the average worker. That's like spending $30,000 on transportation today. So how did people actually get around? They walked. Most frontier towns were small enough that you could walk anywhere you needed to go in 15 minutes. When people needed to travel longer distance, they used stagecoaches, trains, or wagons pulled by mules or oxen. Horses were expensive to buy, expensive to feed, and required constant care. Many cowboys did not even own their horses. Ranchers provided them, and riders switched mounts frequently to avoid exhausting any single animal. That legendary bond between cowboy and horse. Pure Hollywood fiction. By the 1870s, railroads connected most major frontier settlements. The Transcontinental Railroad was completed in 1869, making train travel faster, safer, and more comfortable than horseback riding. If you needed to get from Kansas City to Denver, you took the train, not a horse. Stagecoaches ran regular routes between towns, carrying passengers, mail, and cargo. They were not the romantic adventure Hollywood portrays. They were cramped, dusty, uncomfortable transportation that got you where you needed to go. Think of them as the Greyhound buses of the frontier. Even cattle drives, which did require horses, were temporary jobs. Cowboys would spend months on the trail, then return to town and go back to walking everywhere like normal people. The image of every frontiersman constantly mounted on horseback is another Hollywood invention. The real Wild West was built by people working together in organized communities, not lone gunmen riding from town to town. These places had schools, churches, newspapers, and local governments. They had business associations and town planning committees. The frontier was about building civilization, not escaping from it. What killed more people in the Old West than outlaws, gunfights, and Indian raids combined? Winter weather and disease were the real enemies. Blizzards, drought, and epidemic diseases like cholera and typhoid fever claimed thousands of lives. The winter from 1885 to 1886 killed 90% of cattle on some northern ranges. Cowboys called it the Big Die-Up, and it bankrupted more ranchers than outlaws ever robbed. The real Wild West was more organized and less violent than modern America. Instead of believing everything you see in westerns, ask yourself what the economic incentives actually were. Towns needed stability to survive, not chaos. The frontier was built by diverse communities working together, not mythical lone gunmen. The most dangerous thing in the Old West was not outlaws or gunfights. It was simply trying to survive the brutal winter weather that could kill you faster than any bullet.